Good evening and welcome to RFL. I'm Richard French. A lot to get to over the next 60 minutes, including the latest efforts when it comes to immigration, a police officer who survived the Capitol riots talking about efforts by some on Capitol Hill to rewrite what actually happened, and more. But we're going to start with President Biden's first address to a joint session of Congress last night. Here, the essence of his speech in 3 minutes.
After 100 days of rescue and renewal, America is ready for a takeoff, in my view. We're working again, dreaming again, discovering again, and leading the world again. We have shown each other and the world that there's no quit in America. There's still more work to do to beat this virus. We can't let our guard down. But tonight, I can say, because of you, the American people, our progress these past 100 days against one of the worst pandemics in history has been one of the greatest logistical achievements this country's ever seen. The American Jobs Plan is a blue-collar blueprint to build America. American tax dollars are going to be used to buy American products made in America to create American jobs. I'd like to meet with those who have ideas that are different, they think are better. I welcome those ideas. But the rest of the world is not waiting for us. To win that competition for the future, in my view, we also need to make a once-in-a-generation investment in our families and our children. That's why I've introduced the American Families Plan tonight. I will not impose any tax increase on people making less than $400,000. But it's time for corporate America and the wealthiest 1% of Americans to just begin to pay their fair share. Trickle-down economics has never worked, and it's time to grow the economy from the bottom and the middle out. We've all seen the knee of injustice on the neck of Black Americans. Now's our opportunity to make some real progress. We have to come together to rebuild trust between law enforcement and the people they serve, to root out systemic racism in our criminal justice system. I know Republicans have their own ideas and are engaged in very productive discussions with Democrats in the Senate. We need to work together to find a consensus. But let's get it done next month, by the first anniversary of George Floyd's death. The country supports this reform, and Congress should act. We have to prove democracy still works, that our government still works, and we can deliver for our people. Our Constitution opens with the words, as trite as it sounds, we the people. Well, it's time to remember that we the people are the government, you and I, not some force in a distant capital. We've stared into the abyss of insurrection and autocracy, pandemic and pain, and we the people did not flinch. It's never, ever, ever been a good bet to bet against America, and it still isn't. We're the United States of America.
President Biden ran through an exhaustive list of concerns from voting rights at home to the global threats posed by China. Now, it had an unusual feel to a presidential address to Congress. COVID restrictions have kept attendance to a minimum, so speech didn't have the same divided room feel that other State of the Union addresses have had. The president did pause to note the history happening behind him last night. For the first time in American history, 2 women appeared behind the president in leadership positions. Nancy Pelosi as House Speaker and Kamala Harris, the Vice President, there in her role as President of the Senate. Reaction from Republicans? Largely sitting on their hands during topics of like removing lead from pipes, increasing the minimum wage. Ted Cruz, he showed just how serious he is about working with President Biden. Now, while the address covered a wide range of topics, most with little detail, the president did give a sales pitch for his infrastructure plans, and he introduced a new plan for families as well. The $2 trillion jobs plan, it would rebuild roads and rebuild and repair bridges. It would eliminate lead pipes, focus on green energy, and a lot more. President also touting the importance of labor unions, envisioning that union workers would do the infrastructure work in what could be a boon for the nation's blue-collar middle class. Last night, the president focused in on his new American Families Plan. It's a $1.8 trillion package that picks up where the COVID relief law left off. It would make child care more affordable and accessible. It would offer American children universal pre-K and 2 years of free community college. Also, it would enhance Pell Grants, codified paid family leave and sick leave, recruit and improve the pay of our teachers, and nutrition assistance, as well as a lot more. Now, that is a lot of spending, on top of spending Congress has already okayed. Biden wants to pay for it with a tax increase on the top 1% or even half of the top 1% back to where rates were under George W. Bush. It's an increase in the corporate tax rate, including companies that paid nothing in taxes, plus some tweaks in the capital gains law, greater IRS enforcement, and other maneuvers aimed at both businesses and those highest income earning Americans. Now we're going to go through the practical politics of Biden's proposals. Can they pass in this divided Congress in our next segment? But for now, let's focus on the speech itself, Biden's delivery, and how what he was selling will be received. And for that, we turn to Paul Glastris. Paul, he's a reporter who became the senior speechwriter for President Bill Clinton. Paul, now the editor-in-chief of Washington Monthly magazine. Paul, thanks for a few minutes. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Richard.
Well, the speech itself, we mentioned the setting, different than any kind of State of the Union we'd ever seen before. Talk about how the backdrop and how the delivery stood out to you.
Well, the backdrop enabled the delivery, right? It was never have we seen a speech to a joint session of Congress be delivered with that level of conversationalness, casualness, almost intimacy. And that was made possible by the fact that there are only 200 people in the room. He wasn't having to talk over, roars of approval and every 2 seconds. And that played to his inherent strengths as a rhetorician, as an orator. He is not as good in the big speeches like his boss, Barack Obama was. He's better in the schmoozing, intimate retail politics. And so it was a well-played tactical play on this by his team and him on the setting.
It was jarring in a lot of ways from what we've been used to hearing for the last 4 years, a lot less I and a lot more we. But also the idea that government's not the enemy, but actually a solution to the American problems. Now, we'll get to how and who will receive it, but just a completely different definition, Paul, in terms of, hey, we're here to help. We're not the problem.
Well, in some ways, every Democratic president makes that argument. What made this different is the full-throatedness of it and really the size. It was the decimal point in the number, right? Instead of 200 billion, you're talking 2 trillion. It's just a giant leap in terms of the amount he wants to spend. And that, too, was something that came with the times. This was not the Joe Biden speech you would have heard 3, 5, 10 years ago, but post-COVID, post-Trump, the public is ready. So it was very much an aggressive, big government speech of the kind we really haven't heard since the 1960s.
When you write speeches like this, who's your audience? And I asked that. We showed a clip of Ted Cruz yawning, sleeping, pick your choice. Listen, Washington's always been politically divided along partisan lines, but not like now. Now it's tribal. To that end, did he care about the folks in the room, or was he talking through the folks watching on the TV set?
More the latter, though some of the former. You noticed that shout out he did to Mitch McConnell, thanking Mitch for suggesting that he name a cancer center after the president's late son, Beau. There was some back slapping and some hand squeezing going on rhetorically there. But he was talking to a broader audience. But the Democrats talk to the American people different these days, anyway, than the Republicans. Donald Trump was really never talking to Democrats. A lot of what he was trying to do was disturb the Democrats with congressional language that pleased his base and fired up people who either would never vote or would only vote for him. Joe Biden is playing a very different game. He is trying to find an on-ramp for those white working-class Trump voters who are willing to come across the aisle or at least favor the positions that he favors. And so you heard, for instance, him say that 90% of the jobs in his infrastructure bill would go to Americans without college degrees. That was an attempt to say, hey, the Democratic Party is not this elitist party you've been led to believe. Join me. I've got your back.
You know, how does he sell it, though, Paul? And by that I mean, I'm trying to think of the family you're describing where you might have, father looking across the table and his kid, if this goes through, could have free community college. And his nephew might get universal pre-K all of a sudden. And all of a sudden, his union job, they got all these infrastructure projects that they could be doing. By the way, they've been helped by stimulus, or they've been helped, with family leave, or whatever the case may be conceivably that they've already gotten and could be getting in this package. And they don't know anybody in their neighborhood who's in the top half of the top 1% who's going to be footing this bill. But somehow a lot of those folks believe that, this is social welfare on steroids and it's not good for them. How does he explain that this is for them, actually, and they're the beneficiaries?
They can be made to believe that the policies are for them. What they don't trust is that it's coming out of the mouth of something other than a Republican, right? These are folks who have turned against the Democratic Party, and whether they like the Republicans or not, they believe the Republicans represent them and they're on their side. So, Donald Trump was a big government guy. He wanted $2,000 checks. He was going to protect Medicare and Social Security. He ran on protecting Medicare and Social Security. So the policies that Biden is putting forward are popular with the Republican base. The question is, can a Democrat in the Oval Office sell that to that population?
And the stuff that he said last night, Paul, I mean, the scope, you used a great term, the decimal point attached to it. I know it didn't have the soaring rhetoric of some of the other folks who stood behind that podium, but it was really big, transformative stuff. Who knows if it'll pass or not, but nobody's going to accuse Biden in the history books of going small.
No, it was big, but it's important to keep in mind not just what he said, but what he didn't say. He didn't say, I want a bill of X trillion dollars. He didn't say, I want to raise taxes X%. He left all the particulars out of the speech. All of that was a signal that he is ready to negotiate with those Republicans, especially the Senate Republicans. Whether he can cut a deal or not, we don't know. But he signaled willingness to carve back and to compromise.
Interesting. Paul Glastris, thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Richard.
All right, everybody, when we come back on RFL, we're going to talk more about what we heard from the president last night and get into some of the math and the politics of this. We'll check the response to his address from the polls, the editorial pages, and a lot more. Plus, as I said, making speeches is nice, but how much of what Biden was pitching last night can he actually get through this Congress? We'll debate that after this.